Hi, I'm John Gosslee, the editor of Fjords Review, and we are broadcasting from New York today. I'm very pleased to have our guests, Megan Garr and Bartley Seigel, the editors of Versal and Pank, will be reading with us today. A little about them. Megan Garr is the author of The Preservationist Documents, which came out by Pilot Books in 2012. She's the editor of the literary and arts journal Versal, which she founded in 2002. She's originally from Nashville, Tennessee, which also happens to be where I grew up. Megan now lives in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. Bartley Seigel is the author of the poetry collection This Is What They Say, and that was published by Typecast in 2012. He's a founding editor of Pank and co-publisher of Tiny Hardcore Press. His writing has been published in Michigan Quarterly, Diagram, Forklift Ohio, Hangman, and Lumberyard magazine. Other than his writing poetry, he's also an assistant professor of creative writing and diverse literatures at Michigan Technological University in Houghton, Michigan. Though right now, he's spending the year teaching and writing at Tartu University in Tartu, Estonia. So we're going to have Bartley Seigel read first, and then Megan Garr. Please make sure to ask your questions there. We'll be covering those after the reading. All right, well, over to you, Bartley.
All right. Well, hello, and hello from Estonia, and thank you for having me this evening. And I'm going to be reading some poems from my book that came out in 2012, This Is What They Say. And these are all poems. Situated in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt, and particularly in Michigan, and particularly in a place called Montcalm County, Michigan, which is dead center of the Mitten. And it's a place where it's a bit of a forgotten place where you sort of put your worst industry and your worst kinds of agriculture, and it's one of the poorest per capita counties in Michigan, which tends to be a pretty poor state to begin with. And growing up there, we lived pretty close to the land and pretty close to the bone, and a lot of the experiences that came out of that upbringing there are what I'm working through in this collection of poetry. So without further ado, a few poems from This Is What They Say. This is what they say. There are places to hunt, places to hide, and love clicks on and off like a lighter. Love is another word for we the people. Sometimes we're all flowers. Other times we're an exaltation of larks. Kissing each other's bodies, we cross our wires to test our hearts and heartbeats. All huddle and quake. We lie with fingers inside one another, whispering aphorisms into each other's cauliflower ears. When we sleep, it is half sleep, and when we dream, it is half dream burned on its side. In the mornings, we arise from our musk like children in rolling waves of laughter. We rise to greet our days. This is what they say. Our mornings won't always be like this. We'll do our little time, save our little money, and find some place where we can't be found. where we can lie in bed until noon staring at the cracks up in the ceiling. There, our skins won't tear or burn or bruise, and our ears won't ring. There, we'll learn to listen to mice in the cupboards, to birds in the bare branches outside our windows, to our hearts and our heartbeats. We'll learn to build a fire and bask in its brittle flame. This is what they say. Over the horizon is another horizon. Down the dirt road is more dirt road. Some dreams deserve to be run down, others to die. We should all learn to tell the time. This is what they say. No longer delighted by the velocity of crows, by the dirt under our nails, by our preachers' fragmented ravings, we become bored as cattle and can't sleep. The brain of the congregation sends us walking down the line to stand in the mildew of the irrigation spray that our sins might wash away. Carrot flour and hard candy, oil shale and whiskey bottle. We speak only in tongues, wide open to fear, to joy, to trouble, come whomever, whatever. Standing in the first rays of the morning sun, drunk on turpentine water, we'll grab anger by its buzzard wings and wave a solemn goodbye. This is what they say. They die, and we want to put our anger in a pill we can pull open at will, snort, or cook for a needle. We want to take over, but we're too busy smashing and peppering, too busy burning and punching out teeth. What the fuck are you looking at? As small children, we'd bite the edge of the kitchen counter and hang there by our heads, arms limp, legs dangling. The marks are still there. We'd hide in our bedrooms under every blanket in the trailer, imagining the smells and colors of today. This is what they say. In the shadow of the sawmill, of the chemical plant, of the grain silo, of the potato barn, in the mud, in the mind, shout, bellow, borrow, steal, testify. Get a belt, get a switch, knock heads, black an eye, puke blood. The gnashing of false teeth, save me, Lord. On a three-wheeler buried under old style, a man can in one hand, a child in the other, a pig fucker, a dirt farmer, a dirt ass, slipshod, snot-nosed, pinch-lipped, and pucker-mouthing, Bible-banging, face-punching, and crank-smoking, truck-stop whores rolling hoses from pickup tailpipes into a John's bedroom window, putting a pistol to an ear, a shotgun in the mouth. Neither running, neither feared, never mind you, son. We're pounding ham-handed on the glass. For the love of Christ, get that balloon out of your mouth like I told you, or ain't nobody going to the Dairy Queen. This is what they say. No one has money. No one has food. We have our skins and our hunger together instead. The trees sway in the wind. The neighbors' dogs bark and bay. We creep down to the river, wade into its water, and fill our buckets with crayfish and clams to put into our bank accounts, by which we mean our bellies. We can't afford new clothes. We can't afford electricity. We can't afford to care, so we pick leeks and dig cattail roots and hunt for mushrooms. We fix the trailer with corrugated tin we stole from a collapsed barn. We adopt every stray dog that crosses our paths because we're fools. This is what they say. Cheers. This year of abundance, this cornucopia of desire, corn in the cribs and hay in the lofts, babies milk fat in their baskets. There's work in the mills and fields, and there's money to be had and spent. The women put on makeup and the men all loosen their collars. The aides in the school gets a fresh coat of paint. The grass is tall and game is thick in the woods. The rivers are full but not high. The fish run on time. The wells don't run dry. This too happens. This is what they say. No one can ever truly know what will happen. Storms kick up dust and demons. New moons cast their brittle light on our excesses, our excuses. Windows board up and children fly south like birds at the onset of winter. We are all cutters and bleeders. We are all of us destined to end where we began. We are all of us saying this all of the time, though none of us seem to hear. This is what they say. Disconcerted and heartbroken, our waters run in perfect time and measure. We find it pretty, even as it chills our feet. Well used, our lives will resemble trenchers piled with bones well picked, grease congealed in the cold-edged light of dawn. Confusion and resentment might linger near the bottom of our cooled kettles, but something beautiful happened here once. Something boiled and steamed, and the scent of our tallow, our sweat and musk, will hang on in the air for a while after we're gone. This is what they say. The moment comes, but all in silence, turning in the tide and drowned in other rushings. Our convictions earnest, our passions unhinged, things fall apart easily and quickly. But once, when the worst worked its seduction and we succumbed, turned in its maw, on its tongue, our sinews torn, our bones crushed, we found our centers weren't lacking. Everything was panic and waking nightmares of lost work and penniless boredom of scattered wayward children. We slouch toward our cheap salvations in whatever way we can, trigger fingers crossed, sight hairs against the blowing gale. This is what they say. Our ghosts are not benevolent, protecting us from minor disasters. Untamed, unnamed, we understand them to be the spirits of cancers, bad hearts, and they walk whispering to our walls. They stand next to our washing machines in our basements, sit on the counters of our kitchens, watch us measure out coffee and bleach, dress our children, squeeze toothpaste, climb into our sheets. We know they are watching, that they care for us like no one else ever could. This is what they say. We'll learn to laugh with our mouths closed. We'll learn to lie in wait. Watching and patience are weapons. This is what they say. And I'll end today with one last poem, because I think I have a little bit more time. I want to end with my favorite one from the collection, and one I haven't been able to read in a while, so I won't put this one out over the airwaves, or whatever the waves are that are on the interwebs. This is what they say. Shivering in the morning light, we gather like cigarette butts at the water's edge, our 1,000 naked bodies in a long chain bent from burden and burnt to the filter. What we've learned. Scars are replaced with more scars. Hair grows up from scorched earth. Once we would have cut ourselves with broken glass that the wind might rush through the breach to line us with fallen limbs and leaves. But beach sand has since worn dull the sharper edges of our pain. Stomachs empty and growling, we've come at last to these shores copper-wired, gear and pulley. All coiled spring and iron will, our words tin-typed on our tongues, we clasp arms and dive into this thing together, electric and beautiful as bullets. We disappear beneath the lake's surface for what seems a grateful eternity, knowing somewhere out beyond the tree line's dark reflection, where the water is cool and clean and clear, the long arc of a sandbar awaits. This is what they say. Thank you.
Great reading, Matt. It was very, very moving. Thank you so much for reading with us today. And next we have Megan Garr. And looking forward to this. Over to you, Megan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, John. Thanks to Fjords and to Matt for opening up tonight. I'm joining you from Amsterdam. So cheers back to you, Matt. Drinking some liquor beer from the locals. I'm also going to read to you from a chapbook that was published by Pilot Books in 2012. Pilot has since joined the place that presses go sometimes into the disappearance. But they've put out this beautiful chap for me, and I'm glad to have been a part of their last puffs on the planet. It's called The Preservationist Documents, and it was inspired. I was doing some research on bookbinding, and I came across an expert in bookbinding named Manly Bannister, and I fell in love with his name so intensely that I decided to read his whole book. And the book he had written back in the 50s was called A Pictorial Manual of Bookbinding. And one of the striking moments for me in reading this book was actually at the very beginning, when he was writing in his preface about his methodology for writing his pictorial manual of bookbinding, and he wrote, "The text matter has been made as brief as possible to avoid confusion from unnecessary words." And I just thought that was so perfect. So I bounced off of that to go on a really long journey that took me several years in writing the preservationist documents. And the documents actually have locations in them, a kind of geography, and that goes from Amsterdam to Nashville to Missoula, Montana, to Iceland. So I hope you can follow my trajectories. So this is the preservationist documents. At one time, we lived at the top of a very steep hill, and this is what we called it. And at the bottom of that very steep hill was a creek, and it rushed, and there were tangles of grapevine and things. The hill sunk and rose small in places. The hill had names we gave it, like mountains and the open air, the air. And this is how we saved it. But despite the threats to the archive, overcapacity, fire, and how mother swore to deer and hawks and owls, the unkempt perimeters that father said, "Look, this is how you know where it ends." We incised it, but slowly. Decades. Grandmother, where the creek headed, said, "There was once a mock orange here," the miscellaneous bamboo. She wakes to coal and the echolocations of whales. We dress. We watch the trains couple under us. Back to elevation, we have called a truce. Us and the ever-growing foreign world. The magnitude, the historian who says, "We will be frozen by our abundance." I name as much as I remember. I intend valleys out of clouds, and for our future as if it will save us. Add to the necessities language. Birds, trees, the sacraments and prepositions lost early. In aphasia we volunteer. And here, brick and heron become foreign first, then reallocate to make sense in this waking place. You wrestle quietly. The jabber turns to murmur, and then in stages nothing. We too stop talking. We prepare for the sea. Nights, when the fog is trapped in the concave of the land, we gather earth ourselves and rise and rise. Cf. lists of what has already been forgotten. And when you could not leave, other things became possible. Clearing the yard, assemblage, or turning over stones you barely dared before. And you could not name the birds or herbaceous, yet both grew and sang. And you imagined cities that ran under ashen weights, at a little less of a roar. Miles, miles of the igneous nightfall. What would have happened if you had waited? So the world stilled and America took you in. You took in America. You were alive all across it. Modal, perfect, pluperfect. Again, 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 this would have happened. And the tephra took in entire skies. The first investigation is what used to be here. Was there once largemouth bass, or was there wind, or the unsettling fever, or some loneliness that took shutters off windows and collected sediment? Was there stone or pile, landfills, or great sections of wire, or were they running, and who was running? Did they know why? Was there a debt of some kind, or a coating of film that was bottled and labeled and studied, and was it concluded that it could be consumed? Was there elm or aluminum, small objects, or folders, or sweat, or any food? Was there paint, or the incredible tea, homes, elk, a lake, some past cast for study? Was there ice, a play? Was it conserved? And then, histories, books of them. Everything. So that's the preservationist documents. I'm going to go a couple years into the future now with you to a new book, which will come out next year with Meal Books in Belgium. And this is actually a bit of a sequel to the preservationist documents. I wrote it while I was in Iceland for a summer, and it's funny because I wrote a bunch of pastoral poems while I was there, and I was kind of freaked out when I got home because I don't consider myself a pastoral poet. So I spent about 2 years revising them and working on the text and trying to get at what I was really doing while I was there. And so that became Terrain. And terrain is, it's a homophone for the terrain that we're all familiar with. It's a geological term that talks about when one part of a continental plate sutures onto another. So I'll read a bit of the beginning and the middle and the end of terrain. On your journey to the earth, do not forget the radiant dust. Take my arms and then the basalt stones. The ice rolls back and bursts, lights the caldera to air. Stand to these hills, a break and circumference of the runoff pools, level with the glassy drift. The body here, for once, is holy. I have come to confirm the light. This land is not mine, but no land is mine. Green, brown, green, gray. Brown, green, gray, brown, white, blue. We take leave of the ground splitting rambles and follow the fence to rivers and rivers to foothills and follow these to the ravine of whales. The whales give the sea to our arms. What we cannot carry we drink, and the rest we tuck into secrets and walk again. We walk so far we forget to stop, and when you double over I pick you up, I take you with the sea. What we leave when we leave, a planet somewhere, its aluminum seas. If at dawn, and if its strands, and if its forms and tendons. Where the land where there is nothing hushed, the glacier's ablation we are propelled. Hold fast to the atmosphere it skins, the empty, empty. Miles homewards cold for days, no less than stars their shutters, no less than home unblinking. Wake to the second, your everything summoned on re-entry. Look now how the city let fall the land, a whole country. Thank you guys very much for listening. I appreciate it.
That was also a great reading. Thank you so much, Megan, for sharing some of your work with us from your new book that's coming out soon. We have some really good questions today. From Senna. Senna asks, this is for both poets, and I guess you guys can answer them in the same order that the reading was in. What was the quickest poem that you ever wrote?
I I've certainly had writing come to me quickly, and I think I have poems that have been published that have maybe been through only a half dozen or so drafts, but by and large, writing for me is an incredibly slow and painful process. I work, well, maybe my benchmark is bad because the writer that I have the closest working relationship with is Roxane Gay, and she publishes a book every 2 days, apparently. But I mean, it took me years to write enough poems for that first collection, and I suspect that it's going to take me years more to produce much material for a second book. So I have had poems that produce themselves over the course of a couple of days or maybe a couple of weeks, but mostly, I mean, I work on stuff for a very, very long time before it's ready to publish.
I'm with you, Matt, on that. I'm also very slow and tedious with my poetry. But I had to think about a poem I wrote, and this is really embarrassing. When I was probably 17 years old, I was in a creative writing class in Nashville with poet Bill Brown, and I suddenly got very inspired. I don't remember why anymore. Probably I was in love or something. And I sat down at a table in the creative writing classroom at my high school, and I just pounded out this poem. And it's got a horrible title. It was called Southern Incense, and it was a Southern poem. And back then I was working in Southern narrative and referencing lots of foliage and stuff. And so I think I must have written that thing in 3 minutes. And for the time and for the age, it was a very successful poem and won me a little bit of money. And so I ended up being very pleased with it. But I don't think I could read it again now. But yeah, it was a fast poem for me, for sure. But it was in the beginning.
Great answers. I know what you mean, Megan, about earlier poems being not as sophisticated or in the same space as the writing that's done now. Let's see, we have a question from the founder of Transatlantic Poetry Series, Robert Peake, who asks, and this is for both poets also, how do you start a poem?
Every poem is a little bit different for me, although when I'm really in a groove writing, and I'm writing every day, out of that production usually is where the first draft of a poem comes. So I sort of have this half-baked theory that you have to have 1,000 pots in the fire to produce dinner by the end of the day. So when I'm working and I'm producing a lot of words, and out of that process will come a draft poem, which is typically an articulation of an idea or an experience that I've had, or a sort of an emotional moment, and then through the drafting process, that poem sort of comes into being, and usually the finished product is a million miles away from whatever seed started it. At least that certainly was the case for all the poems in the book. Stuff that I'm working on now tends to start in the same way. So I guess that's that's the way I'm working. But the strangest thing for me is the enormous distance that tends to exist between a finished poem and an early draft. I've had poems that have been in the hopper for 5-6 years, and I'll work on those poems for a couple of weeks, and they'll go away for a couple of months, and I'll work on them for a couple of weeks, and they'll go away for a couple of months. And then by the time that thing sees publication, it's generally so far removed from where it started that I'm not even sure it has a lot of relevance to that moment anymore.
That's a good question, and I think I have a lot of cheesy answers, but I came to admit to myself several years ago that, well, actually not that long ago, that I need a lot of time to write just one line or even one poem. I need probably similar to Matt's process. I actually will slot a whole day to try to work out something now, and it took me a while to figure that out. Even though I've been writing for a really long time, I was mimicking the processes of my teachers. From 16-year-olds old through probably my mid-20s, I was mimicking their processes and like waking up early and going on walks and reading other books of poems, which is definitely still an inspiration, and doing exercises and stuff like that. And it took me a while to find my own process. And finally, in my mid-20s, I realized that I need a lot of silence, and I need to just somehow find a few words in that silence. And from those words, I start to chisel out something. And similar to Matt, sometimes these poems take a really long time to see publication because they go through so many iterations. But more often than not lately, I've been able to chisel out work in a day. And I think the process of working with the Iceland poems, as I call them, the terrain work, I learned a lot more about myself, again, as a poet. It was sort of a rediscovery. And I've figured out that I really enjoy working with poems in one sitting. And then I can leave them for a long time and go back to them and chisel them down and revise them, because I think revising is a big part of my process. But then that first moment, it's a glorious moment when you have written a piece and it happens in one day and you're just like, this is amazing. And usually those are like 20-line poems. I'm not an epic writer, and so I like to let them sit for a very long time now and then go back to them. I'm probably contradicting myself. It's a weird process, but definitely silence is a huge part of that now.
I think both of you touched on this in your answers to the last question. Maybe you might expound on it a little bit. When a verse doesn't come to you easily, do you try to continue with the same idea, or do you change your approach entirely in editing?
I would say I have a couple of things going on in my process when poems aren't materializing or aren't coming together in a way that I would like to sort of allow me to deal with that. The first thing is just easy come, easy go. I've never been particularly precious about my poetry. If poems aren't working, they go away. I've never particularly been interested in sort of foisting upon readers work that's clumsy or that's forced. just because I've put time and effort into it, and I might think it's good or I might think it has merit, but if it's not working, it has to go away. That said, I'm also a little bit of a language pack rat. I keep all my old journals. I save religiously versions of draft after draft after draft, so that for years I can go back to those poems and I can cherry pick lines, I can cherry pick phrases, I can cherry pick scenes, things that may not have come to fruition in a particular poem at one point in time, but that I can come back to later and sort of reuse or remake or reinvent for a new poem or see in a new way. And also that pack ratting of language allows me to go back and re-see old work that I may have produced a year or 2 or 3 years ago, or however long ago, but see it through the lens of now. And in many cases, I'm able to sort of re-envision those poems that didn't work out earlier and make them into something new now. So I'm quick to abandon, but I always kind of keep that stuff tucked under the bed for later use.
One thing I found in the last 2 years or so that helps me more than I expected it to, actually, when I first tried it, is breaking the poem completely apart and literally quite physically giving it space on the page. And then I see line for line just divorced from each other, completely separate, what's going on. And I work a lot with enjambment and just at the level of each line, what's going on. And so basically making the poem like an accordion and pulling it apart helps me see, actually often helps me pinpoint what's wrong or what's not working or is just not connecting to the perceived reader or to whatever idea I'm working on, and to cut it out. I've been quite precious over the years and have been letting that go, and that's been very helpful to the process. So I do believe in giving lines that aren't working in a specific space, giving them time to breathe and throwing them out and maybe using them later. They'll come up in another way sometime, but that kind of accordion effect to the poems that I've been doing for the last few years has been really interesting and has helped me also re-visualize poems in general for myself after years of just thinking about the poem on the left hand justified and with stanzas and whatnot, kind of experimenting with that space a little bit, even though I don't consider myself that experimental. But yeah, that's my answer.
Great answers. Very informative on the craft of editing. We have a short announcement from the founder of Transatlantic Poetry Series, Robert.
Great, thanks, John. Can you? Hopefully, you guys can see me now. So we are hosting our next live broadcast at the end of October with the UK Poetry Society. We don't have the exact date or poets lined up yet, but we're in the final stages of that. So just want to remind everybody to please go sign up for the newsletter, and you'll be among the first to know when we announce the dates and the poets for our October reading. And again, that's with the UK Poetry Society, the largest member-supported poetry organization here in the UK. So very excited to have them, as we are with Fjords, and very excited to have Megan and Bartley with us today.
Thank you so much for reading with us today, Matt and Megan, and thank you for tuning in. I'm sure that everybody got as much out of it, or maybe even more than I did. So make sure to tune into the next Transatlantic Poetry Series next month, and have a great rest of the weekend. Thank you.